Hey, what's up everybody? This is Osterberg501 and today I want to go over the potential future for PvP in Diablo 4. And just to be clear, I'm going to be going over all the information we have for PvP in Diablo 4, but I also want to go over some potential things we could be seeing in the future, specifically based around PvP, because I think there is a lot they could do on the PvP side of the Diablo franchise. So in Diablo 4, all of the PvP on launch is going to be based around Fields of Hatred. Now these are specifically designated PvP areas in the open world where when you enter, you'll get a warning that you're entering a PvP zone and you're able to PvP against any other players in that area. You'll also be able to group up and fight against other players as a group. And also a really cool feature that they haven't talked about but has been shown in footage is that when you're going against other players, any abilities they use are going to be colored red. So you can specifically see this in one of the gameplay trailers where it shows a sorceress using their big swirling snake ability, and instead of being red and orange like it normally would be, it's completely red. And I think that is a very good feature to have just to allow you to much more easily see what abilities you want to be dodging. And these Fields of Hatred aren't only going to be for PvP, there's also going to be other objectives and enemies you can fight in them, primarily to obtain Seeds of Hatred, which is going to be the PvP specific currency. And anything you do in the Fields of Hatred are going to give you these seeds, but these seeds will drop and are able to be looted once you're killed. So if you have a ton of seeds on you, you go get in a fight and lose, that other player can loot all of your seeds. But you're able to go to an altar of extraction to turn these Seeds of Hatred into red dust. Now red dust is the finished version of Seeds of Hatred and you're not able to lose red dust. But when turning Seeds of Hatred into red dust at these altars, everybody in that area will be able to see that you're doing this. So other players could potentially come over and try to kill you and loot your seeds before you turn them into that permanent currency. And once you get this red dust, it can be used at PvP specific vendors, but I'm not 100% sure on everything you're going to be able to buy with red dust. We know for sure that you're able to get a ton of different PvP cosmetics, mounts, and other ornamental rewards, so tons of different cosmetics, but we're not sure if you're going to be able to just buy additional gear from this. In the past, the developers did say you would be able to buy gear specifically from doing PvP. Obviously wouldn't be better gear, but it would just be another way to obtain gear. But the most recent time the developers have talked about these Fields of Hatred, they have not mentioned that, so I'm not sure if it's just going to be cosmetics or if you're also going to be able to purchase actual gear. And there's also going to be some other smaller systems tied into this. Specifically, they have mentioned a type of bounty system where if one player is just destroying everybody else in that area, then they'll get a bounty on their head, and if you defeat them, you get a lot more Seeds of Hatred and additional rewards. But these Fields of Hatred are going to be the primary form of PvP on launch of Diablo 4, but I think there is a lot more potential for further expanding on PvP in general as the game gets future content updates, new seasons, and new expansions. Now we do know there's going to be a bunch of different leaderboards once the first season starts, and I'm assuming there's probably going to be a handful of different leaderboards specifically based around PvP. We're not exactly sure what those are going to be, but I would be very surprised if there's not some leaderboards specifically for PvP, which I think is something that's very good. I think people that want to focus more on PvP should have content and should have leaderboards based around that. But I'm hoping in the future seasons and expansions that we get new PvP modes and expansions on PvP content, because I think there's just a lot of potential for PvP in the Diablo franchise. And there's a lot they could do. And I think one of the primary things they could do is have arenas. You could have 1v1, 2v2, 3v3 arenas, and you could add in rankings. You could even model it after World of Warcraft because there's just a working system there. And I think just an implementation of that, and you can legitimately just use pieces of the open world as the arena, and then you could potentially add just rewards for hitting certain ranks and everything you would expect from arenas. But I think even just a small system like this would add so much to PvP. because it would give people who want to focus more on PvP constant goals to reach and allow for a more competitive form of PvP. And even early on in Diablo 3, there was actually an arena system. If you follow Diablo 3's development, there was a fully working arena system, and they even had betas to test it. You could probably find some of that old footage, but I think that type of a system would just be amazing for Diablo. And then past that, there's a lot more you could do as well. You could do battlegrounds. Diablo Immortal do have those, and they're somewhat inspired from World of Warcraft battlegrounds. You could do that in Diablo 4 as well. Have a battleground with just different objectives to give more content to PvP players. And on top of all of the potential systems that you could implement for more PvP content, you could also add in more PvP specific gear. Now, World of Warcraft also has this, where there are PvP specific items with their own tier sets, and they work a little bit differently compared to PvE. But I think they could simplify that a little bit and just have different items that basically only work in PvP and could do different things. And this would also allow the developers to tweak and balance those PvP specific items only for PvP to allow general PvP to just be more balanced. Now, that's something that's a little bit more far-fetched. I'm not sure if that's something they would ever do, but it is something that I think would be pretty interesting that they could potentially do down the road. And they could even test this in a season. Like I mentioned before when going over seasons, if they add some piece of content or system to a season that players don't like, they can just not add it to the permanent form of the game and generally use it as just a testing ground to see what players like. Now, I don't think there's going to be any season that's specifically just based around PvP, but I do think adding different systems or content into seasons that are based around PvP as additional content could be something that could work very well. And then obviously once you get into expansions, they could add much more substantial pieces of new PvP content or systems. And looking past all the potential content and systems for PvP, there's one thing that could generally make or break if PvP in Diablo 4 is good, and that's balancing. And balance would generally encompass basically everything about your build, about your character, all of your stats, your gearing, your skill trees, all that type of stuff. And if in PvP there's some handful of different builds that just destroy everything else, that takes away a lot of the possible content and enjoyment people could have with PvP, because it's only going to be a handful of builds and nothing else is really going to be viable. And this is something we obviously won't have any idea of until the game is actually released and until metas start to form and people start to figure out what's really good in PvP. But at a more philosophical level, I do think there's quite a lot that the developers could do with future updates and future expansions into the game is potentially change the way you could balance for PvP. Now, one of the best ways I think to specifically balance for PvP compared to PvE is just to have different balancing modifiers for the skills of every class. Now, that would obviously be much harder in a game like this where you're going to have tons of skills that all can be modified in certain ways just through skill trees, then be modified through legendaries. So there's a lot of different pieces to the puzzle that would affect these different skills, but I think an even easier way to go about balancing that could potentially work really well for PvP is just at a base level for every skill in the game from every single class is just to have a different balance if you're in PvE or PvP. And like I mentioned, there's some other games that actually do this, and it's not fully changing up how the skill works. It's generally just tweaking numbers, tweaking CC, and maybe some additional modifiers to be different from PvP to PvE. And this would just generally allow for a much more enjoyable experience in PvP. Because the best case scenario is where a few years down the road in Diablo 4, they've added a bunch of new systems for PvP. You have arenas, battlegrounds, open world PvP. You have all this PvP, and then they have the balancing at a decent point to where there's just dozens of different builds that are all viable in PvP. And this would just allow any player that ever wants to partake in PvP to have just a ton of content and gameplay to constantly partake in. But also keep in mind, everything besides the Fields of Hatred that we went over is nothing that has been announced or revealed or even leaked. The only things we've ever heard of about PvP are in Fields of Hatred. Everything else is just my theories or the potential of actual PvP for Diablo 4. With it being a live service game and that being such a big focus for the game, I'm just hoping that PvP isn't just kind of a small niche that's just kept to Fields of Hatred, and I hope that it is further developed as new content is released. But that's pretty much all I want to go over. So subscribe if you want to see more Diablo 4 or other videos. Leave a like if you liked the video. If you comment down below what you guys think about the Fields of Hatred and the potential for PvP. And thanks for watching.